Here you go, Donna.
Thank you once again to this panel, but also to all the panelists. Excellent information, wonderful takeaways, and we did something really smart at the end of this conference to put in a session where we're going to ask Illah to stick with us up here and introduce President of the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, Jennifer Giovannitti, to go through and identify key questions and takeaways for us. Because we've had lots of information today, and it's going to be a great time to hear their debrief.
I guess we're going to perch up here and have a casual conversation, and we promise to get you out of here by 5 or sooner, making up time at the end here. So yeah, I think what we want to do is have a casual conversation. I wanted to recognize that as a renowned roboticist, it was nice to see you pick up the microphone and fix it so it stayed on at the end of the... Very clever. And, you know, I just wanted to recognize that throughout the day here, this is the second time we've done this program, the Focus Forward program, building on artificial intelligence and now moving into this next tag on. And to see university presidents and provosts, business community, members of the legislature, it has just been a really wonderful connection of nonprofits and just the public-private sector to have this conversation. And I, for one, learned a lot. I never knew the word petaflop. So I learned what a petaflop was today, and that West Virginia, Jim's got nearly 5 of them, which sounded really great. So that was good too, you know. As much as you can learn in a day, it's very exciting. So, you know, as I took notes throughout the day, you know, one of the things I wanted to kick off with you and just getting your reaction to was something that Tom said this morning when he really set the stage for this topic today. And if I can quote you, Tom, you said that we are flying blind into the future of jobs now. And I think that's really interesting, and I just wanted to see if you could react to that.
I think the cross-section of speakers you had today, I couldn't agree with Tom more on this. The cross-section of speakers is interesting because we're flying blind. And in that cockpit of that airplane, you've got government, you've got entrepreneurs, you've got education, and you've got basically everybody else, including parents, who are making day-by-day decisions by deciding what camps to send their kids to or to dissuade their kids from going to. And so they're all at the controls, and pretty much none of them have enough information to know what to do next. And it's a really fascinating and scary place to be. There's one solace that I take from it all, which is that no matter what happens with jobs and with the future, I'm convinced that the winners will be people who understand how to interact with humans and how to interact with machines. And so there's an underlying core understanding of computers and the limits of computation and an understanding of social soft skills, as we heard about on several of the panels. And those two, no matter what, are going to be absolutely critical to success. So we don't know what exhaustively is required to succeed in the future, but we know foundationally you have to have at least these two. And that's at least the starting point.
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon has been really a leader in bringing forward this idea of humanities in the age of technology. And I think this is really important. This parents in the cockpit, I can tell you, until I just heard you describe Google Docs, I also, with all my kids in our public schools, now in 2 states, all using Google Docs as well. And I thought to myself something that Rebecca brought up, because it gets to me, it brings me back to this point about equity, though. And if you have neighborhoods or states with higher poverty levels or lower population density where you might not have broadband and other things, and then you're given a little iPad or a Chromebook and Google Docs to do your homework in school and travel with it, it seems like a leveler for the marginalized kids in theory. And yet, you bring up a bigger ethics issue.
It's so tricky and difficult. So first of all, we like to believe that at least mobile technology has been a leveler. But ironically, the studies I've at least heard about secondhand are that families that have mobile devices at home for their children to use, if compared to families who have interactive devices such as laptops at home, the children who have access to interactive devices such as laptops end up spending a far greater proportion of their time producing, inventing, creating, and sharing. Whereas the families whose children have mostly access to small mobile devices like cell phones end up spending most of their time consuming. And so even the advance of the mobile phone technology, which we hoped was a leveler in creating access to some of the school materials at home, in fact has created greater inequity and greater disparity, because there's actually a perception among low-income families that don't need that laptop anymore because we've got the mobile phone. And that's a disaster if your children are going to spend more time consuming, that means YouTube, by the way, and less time producing, using Darkroom or Photoshop or any other tool that makes them creative and expressive. So even if you start at the technology base, we have that problem. Step up to broadband, and I know so many people here, like Mike Green, have been desperately interested in the question of broadband through the state. Same problem. Every time you take away broadband, you decrease the chance people have to be creative with the most modern tools that we offer, especially as the tools that we offer, such as Photoshop, are becoming online. The best tools I have that I can counsel children in middle school and high school to use are now online tools. You can't even install them on computers anymore. So having a computer at home doesn't even do you any good any longer unless you have broadband. We've actually retrogressed to a place where lack of broadband is a worse problem than it was 10 years ago, which is very ironic and unfortunate situation. And then, of course, add to that the Chromebook fiasco. And it's great to have Chromebooks in the sense that you have a word processing item, but it's a disaster if you don't have broadband, because now if you have a paucity of internet connection, the Chromebook's a brick, whereas an old-fashioned computer just works. And so, you know, we live in a world where we design new technologies for the best conditions. That's what designers do. They don't necessarily think about southern West Virginia. They think about the best conditions in the best cities. Design for that, and then that thing that they just designed gets executed across the whole world, smeared across all the high and low income areas. And so it ends up having very variegated impact. And it's a shame because we're not designing right. It's going to take, I think, awareness and a campaign of awareness around these issues to actually design in a way that doesn't just keep widening these gaps between those who have and those who do not have.
Yeah, and this has been a really interesting and special approach you've taken, both in seeing this in West Virginia, the disparities and how to solve those, and what you've done with the Create Lab to really empower people through learning and robotics, and how kids can be empowered by technology in ways that help them grow. Do you see a broader potential for this type of learning in public schools in more rural states like West Virginia, or is it just so difficult because of, just some of the access issues?
I absolutely do see a potential. Our theory of change is fundamentally to engage with schools of education locally, because the only people on the ground who have the capacity to create vigor in the local schools are the local schools of education, and they're the only ones who culturally understand the challenges faced locally. So what we do with West Liberty, with Marshall, and with WVU is work directly with education folks in those universities to build capacity for them to understand how to take the technologies we have that can be spread in spite of challenges with broadband, for instance, and use those in middle schools, in kindergartens, and high schools. That kind of cottage growth, that organic growth, is what it takes, I believe. We're doing Ohio now. I believe all of Appalachia could be served well this way. And honestly, the same technique of using schools of education across the country to work locally just with the school districts they understand best, I think that's a recipe even for the highest tech, wonderful cities in our union. So I think it's generally the right thing to do. It's not what Houghton Mifflin's going to do. It's not what big companies are going to do, because what they need to maximize profit is to create a single product that can be shrink-wrapped and then resolved as a sale item across the whole country. And what I'm saying is you have to massively customize everything you do to local regions and local culture.
Yeah, this is a big shift, the hyper-local. And, a state like West Virginia is so prime for the hyper-local mentality and the hyper-local adoption of learning. When we were putting together this event and we were thinking about some of the takeaways, we were concerned with what will revolutionize education and make it adaptable for all so that it we don't leave anybody out. But it was also about this idea of jobs. So how could what we saw today with some of the entrepreneurs really be appropriate and be seen as something that could happen in West Virginia? Robotics was fascinating for us because in theory, and Mark DeSantis talked about this, they're serving, I think he said 170 different clients or municipalities around the world. So you've got your algorithms and your way to read the road surface goes up into a cloud, comes back down, and then you're sort of creating the plan. And employees are flying to XYZ town, doing the work, flying home, and that could be anywhere. You could be in Spencer or Webster Springs if you could upload it to the cloud and have also that technology piece so you could run that kind of speed of data sharing and analysis.
If you look at the ways Pittsburgh succeeded over the last 10 years or so, the renaissance that happened was that you had a cultural renaissance. You had things like the Pittsburgh Cultural District. You had low cost of living, and you had access to skill, to a skilled base that were actually easy to hire because you didn't have a crowded marketplace. If you look at West Virginia today, it is a whole lot like Pittsburgh 10 years ago. Now, I'm comparing a state to a city. I apologize. But you have a number of cities in West Virginia that have undergone a renaissance culturally. Look at a place like Fayetteville, where you have art and local industry that's outstanding, right? It's become a destination. When you have a series of cities that are cultural destinations, and you know that you have low cost of living, that's in the bag, you got that one. Now all you need is access to those skills. And there's precise skills that I believe your community colleges and colleges could absolutely provide. If you could create that combination, you're right. The companies you saw today, and just about any company in the space of big data, data analytics, and machine learning can exist anywhere. It needs those three things. Quality of life is a big deal. Turnover is a huge issue, as one of the gentlemen on the panel mentioned. And in fact, there's been a lot of challenges in the Bay Area because it's so easy for employees to lose faith in what their company is doing and rapidly go to a different company. In a place like West Virginia, if you can combine quality of life with all these wonderful qualities you already have, like cultural innovation, I think you have a chance. But fundamentally, it depends on one thing, in my opinion, and that's teacher innovation. And for teachers to have the room to innovate means for them to have the release time and the distance from the classroom to be able to actually design a risk and then execute that risk. And that's the biggest challenge, is to create innovation in your teacher corps, both in K through 12, P through 12, but also in community colleges and colleges. That, plus the other 3 or 4 things I mentioned, that's your recipe. I think that with that recipe, you could absolutely succeed.
Yeah, I agree. one of the things that was strongly hit in the panel that was on assets with especially Jim Estep and General Hoyer. And Jim Estep and I have had this conversation over the past year. There's this big strategy to bring West Virginians back because there are so many amazing people that have left the state for jobs, and could they be recruited back? And Jim knows I've always pushed back on this because I've said, my husband and I came to West Virginia. We had no family relation here at all. We came for really interesting jobs. Didn't think we'd stay for as long as we stayed, but it changed the trajectory of my entire career because my heart and my sort of intellectual side had so much fulfillment working in West Virginia. And that's also that piece about the quality of life. So Jim and I have talked about this. I think there's huge potential to rope in folks that that did not graduate or were not raised in West Virginia to build out because of what Jim has in Fairmont with really interesting jobs at NOAA and Leidos and all the things that were shown. And then in the southern part of the state, where we really see one of the most miraculous things that we've seen the fact that the Boy Scout facility, the Bechtel Summit, has the 5G network in the state, in the coal fields, is incredible. If that can happen in West Virginia in the coal fields, and we can have a major supercomputing, infrastructure, hardware in Fairmont, it just seems like those are incredible accomplishments that have already been made.
Yeah, we saw this trend in Pittsburgh. My students used to leave. It was common. They'd come to Pittsburgh. Believe it or not, as a PhD student, they'd buy a house because paying mortgage on the house was cheaper than renting a house, for real.
Back in the day.
So they'd buy a house back there, before you had to find something there. And they'd pay the mortgage for 4 or 5 years and then sell it. And then they'd leave Carnegie Mellon. And they'd always sell it and leave because they didn't want to stay in Pittsburgh. And today they stay. But you know what they're doing today? My best entrepreneur friends, who are all rock climbers and long-distance trail runners, they all come down here to the New River Gorge. So they have to spend 3 hours commuting to their fun. So I ask you, if you had 4 outstanding companies near the New River Gorge, and they were told they could have a 10-minute commute on a bicycle to work and another 10-minute commute to the New River Gorge to do all the rock climbing that they want, I think a whole lot of people would snap up that opportunity.
Yeah, rivers and ski resorts brought us here. Well, as I don't know how many minutes are left, but so many interesting things were covered today by so many expert panelists. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that, are questions from the audience more broadly about what it will take for us to really continue to build on the assets that West Virginia has so that the knowledge-based economy, which we know is coming quickly and will change jobs. So think about a question and put up a hand if you have one. So I'll switch to another question in the meantime, but honestly, if there's any engagement from the audience, we're happy to pass the mic. Yes. You want to just shout it up here? We can probably hear you. Go ahead. Just say it.
I would just like to say that it's amazing to have an event like this. I came back to West Virginia in 1992 to open the Mantec office. And our biggest challenge was convincing West Virginia students that there were actually jobs here to stay for. And the paradigm you're talking about. Everybody thought you get your degree and you leave to get a job. And we had a little Navy contract. I had to hire 35 people and get them to stay in Fairmont to work on a Navy contract. And it was difficult to convince 35 people to stay for high-paying tech jobs in Fairmont. And to go from that to today, talking about big data, Lido's coming in, hiring 170 people. At the same time, you've got SAIC, other big companies, little companies like mine, up to 100 people. It's just amazing that we've come this far that you can have a meeting like this saying, how are we going to leverage it from here? So I'd just like to say that I commend the education system. We always look to make things better, and I think we should, but we have to also look back and think about what a great job has been done in West Virginia already to get to where we are today. So I want to commend everybody here and the education system that we already have in place for making it an environment where we can even talk about the kinds of things that are going on in Kingwood, in Fairmont, and Morgantown, and moving on down the corridor down into this area. So we got to pat ourselves on the back a little bit to get to where we're getting to where we are now.
Agreed.
I just wondered if we might get a word from Mitch Carmichael or other legislator about what this means for upcoming policy, what this means for the legislative forum coming up in November. Comments? And any other legislator too?
Thank you, Donna, and it is a pleasure and an honor to be with you, and it is exciting. West Virginia's on the move. We're finally on the march. We're heading in the right direction, and you've seen some of the numbers. We've had the fastest growing GDP, personal income growth in the country in the first quarter of 2019. We've added so many jobs over the last 3 or 4 years, and we are expanding broadband, and that is critical from our perspective of a technology state. But it's, I think the message or the mission for the public servants in the room is to connect this information, the data that we're being provided here today, with the general public and make sure that they understand the connection between all of the data, all of the technology initiatives, all of the changes that we need to make as a society in West Virginia, and connect that with the benefit to their life, to their jobs, and their communities. And I think we're doing that, and it is we're finding more and better ways to do that. And so we've put a lot of emphasis on education over the past several years. I heard Dr. Payne say he's heard so many good things about the education initiatives that we pursued. Well, I haven't heard that many of them, but and I've been hearing a lot of it. But it is good, and I'm fond of a quote by Gandhi, because it's really come home to roost with me here lately, is that no progress happens without a struggle. And so the things that we're going through in West Virginia, it is a struggle. But it's on the other side of this struggle is a victory for the people of West Virginia, for making their lives better, for improving the standard of living and health care, delivery of broadband technology and information. We are poised for greatness in this state. We have so many assets that we've talked about. And so it is with great gratitude that I listened to some of the presentations here today, and we'll take this information and be inspired to continue to march in West Virginia towards progress, opportunity, and to make this state the best state in America to live, work, raise a family, and start a business. So thank you very much, Don. Yes. Thank you.
Secretary of State, would you like to add anything going forward? Take away.
Thank you. I think I'd like to just echo some of what's been said, or maybe summarize it. To me, for West Virginia to be reaching out and grabbing this opportunity, when you think about it, throughout mankind's history, there have been 4 or 5 major transformations. We're talking about from the hunter-gatherer stage to the agricultural age, Stone Age, Bronze Age, then the industry. Okay, we're talking the technological revolutions, the 1800s. We are living in the next one in just the last 10 years, and it was talked about today, the interconnectedness, what Bluetooth did that allowed all these gadgets to talk to one another, to give us this enormous amount of data. And then to think right here in West Virginia, we have the supercomputers, the high-performance computing capabilities. When we start to recognize that, and then to have this sort of group to recognize that and say, let's get together and get these great minds together in the room and talk about it in these different areas, entrepreneurship, education, and so forth. I'm just real pleased to see the recognition of the moment, seizing the moment. Kairos is the word, the right action at the right time. I think this sort of gathering of people is that right action at the right time. So let's capitalize on it. Let's keep the momentum going. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to the group, and thank you all for what you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you, for spending the whole day here. I mean, to give up an entire day, especially if you're in the legislature and you're a public official, or you're thinking about how to improve the hyper-local approach with what you do with your businesses. I mean, this is really important, and we're really grateful that you've spent the whole time here. Any sort of closing wind downs that you think we should add here, Illah?
The one closing thought I had that I wrote down was a statement made by somebody earlier, I think 2 panels ago, which was we have to face decisions. There are clear decisions to make. Yes, broadband is important, but policies, citizens on through, policies about how we're going to change education, how we're going to improve it. You have world-class pre-K. Now, how do you take that world-class concept and apply it to the entire dynamics of education, all the way through entrepreneurship, through angel funding, so that you can have businesses here? I think that application of and recognition that you have to make decisions, active decisions from here on forward, and that's the only way we're going to get there. No cruise control allowed, not even a Tesla autopilot cruise control. It's all up to people. That's all I got.
Thanks. And then for my perspective, people that know me well know that I care probably the most about human capital. And, this idea that we have to invest in people throughout the course of their lives and create a philosophy or a culture that people have to own their own human capital. And I know Rocky's heard me say this. There was an economist that actually spoke to the Focus Forward last year that I worked closely with when I was at the Federal Reserve. And I told him I quote him all the time, and he's okay with it. But we were on a work group once, and he said to me, Jen, economists think of human capital like something you would purchase a toaster. It's like a consumer good. And he said, people wouldn't expect their car that they currently drive to last for more than 10 or 15 years. Some of us, can get that out of a car, but generally speaking, your human capital, you should always be thinking about how it wears out on you and how you need to be acquiring more of it. Sometimes that's a job change. Sometimes that's a new type of certification or education. Sometimes that's just a new experience of what you're doing or taking a new approach, like experimenting at a hyperlocal. And so I told Kartik that I quote him a lot now because I think this resonates, that you should be owning your own human capital and thinking about how it wears out on you and what you can constantly be doing to build new things within yourself, but how we as a society on the policy front should be trying to figure out how do we constantly, from a very early age at birth through the course of a person's life, continuing to empower, enable, and finance ways for people to continue to build their human capital, because we heard it many times today that less important than ABC certification is people want a skill. They want you to be good at something, and they also want you to be an independent and creative thinker so that you can adapt when society adapts. So I'm glad we have so many here that are invested in what we need to do that relates to human capital. And I do think it's a long-term commitment, but it is probably one of the most important things, and we need to be clever about how we approach it from early learning on to adulthood. So with that, I guess we thank you all, and we hope you have a nice evening.
Thank you.